You don't deserve that apartment, Claire. You barely did anything for Mom. My brother smirked across the courtroom. I swallowed hard. Are you sure you want to do this? I asked. He laughed, and that's when everything changed. My name is Claire Dawson, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a mid-level nurse in a busy city hospital, pulling long shifts that leave you emotionally hollow by the end of the week. But I never complained, not once. While my brother Ethan was busy closing business deals and attending networking dinners, I was the one sitting beside Mom during chemotherapy, holding her hand through the worst nights of her life. Family always saw me as the reliable one, not the impressive one, not the successful one, just reliable. Ethan was the one they praised at every gathering, the confident son with the sharp suit and sharper tongue. I wasn't glamorous or loud, I didn't have a title that impressed anyone at a dinner table, but I showed up every single time. I paid the medical bills quietly. I handled the doctor visits, the pharmacy runs, the insurance calls that made your head spin. I sat through sleepless nights on a plastic hospital chair, listening to the sound of monitors beeping while the rest of the family slept comfortably in their own beds. When Mom passed, all I had left was grief and the small apartment she had lived in for 20 years. That apartment wasn't just property, it was memory. It was sacrifice. It was every holiday we spent there, every late night conversation, every moment I chose her over my own comfort. I didn't know then that Ethan had already decided it should be his. If you've ever been the one who stayed while everyone else walked away, you know exactly how this feels. Subscribe and tell me your story in the comments below. Have you ever been overlooked by your own family? Click hype and let's get into what happened next. The funeral was barely over when Ethan brought it up. We were still in Mom's apartment, the smell of her rose-scented candles still hanging in the air, when he casually used the phrase, splitting assets. I remember staring at him, confused, because there had never been any conversation about shared ownership. This was Mom's apartment. She lived there. I cared for her there. The idea of splitting it felt like a slap delivered with a smile. She promised it to me, Ethan said, leaning against the kitchen doorframe like he already owned the place. Verbally, we talked about it. I didn't know what to say. I had never heard Mom mention anything like that, not once. Within days, extended family members started calling me, and not to offer comfort. They were calling to suggest that Ethan was more capable of handling the property. An uncle said Ethan had better connections. A cousin told me I should be practical. I felt blindsided in a way I hadn't even felt at the funeral. Grief, I understood. This, I didn't. Then the court notice arrived. Ethan had filed a legal claim for full ownership of the apartment, which had been independently valued at 75 lakh rupees. I stood in Mom's hallway holding that envelope, the paper slightly trembling in my hands, reading words I never imagined I'd read in my lifetime. My brother was taking me to court. The first hearing was humiliating in a way I still struggle to describe. Ethan's lawyer stood before the judge and painted me as emotionally unstable, financially dependent, and incapable of managing property. My years of caregiving were reduced to a single dismissive phrase: basic daughter duties, nothing more. As if loving someone through their death was something ordinary, something that didn't count. I sat in that courtroom and heard my own relatives whispering behind me, and the sound of their low voices felt colder than anything the lawyer said out loud. Ethan sat across the room with his arms crossed and a small, satisfied smile on his face. He believed he had already won. The betrayal didn't stop at the courtroom door. Ethan began working the family like a chess player, moving pieces quietly and deliberately. He told cousins, aunts, and uncles that I was being selfish, that I wanted to keep an apartment I didn't need just out of spite, that I was holding on to something that could give him, a businessman with real potential, a proper foundation. My aunt called me one afternoon, her voice soft in that particular way people use when they've already made up their minds. "Claire, you should just let it go," she said. "He needs it more than you do." I held the phone and said nothing for a moment. I thought about the nights I had slept on that apartment floor because Mom was too anxious to be alone.
I thought about the shifts I had skipped, the social events I had missed, the relationships I had let fade because I was always needed somewhere else. And then I thanked my aunt politely and ended the call. The second betrayal came from the courtroom itself. Ethan's legal team submitted financial documents designed to generate sympathy, painting him as a man under serious monetary pressure who desperately needed the inheritance. It might have worked, except I had seen something that week that made my stomach tighten. A photograph on his social media account, a shiny new luxury car parked in front of a restaurant, captioned with a proud little comment about treating himself. He had posted it just days before submitting those documents. He was lying, deliberately, carefully lying. Then came the third cut. I found out through a social media post, the way you find out things nobody wanted you to know, that the family had held a gathering, a dinner at a cousin's house. Everyone was there, everyone except me. There was no argument, no confrontation. I was simply not invited. I stared at the photographs on my phone, all the familiar faces laughing around a table, and felt the particular ache of being erased without a single word being said. Ethan reached out to me privately not long after. "Settle this quietly," he said, his voice flat and certain, "or you'll regret it." It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was the kind of threat that lands harder because it's delivered calmly, like the person saying it has no doubt at all about the outcome. I was struggling, I won't pretend otherwise, but something in me had started to shift. His confidence was too loud, too absolute, and I had begun to remember small things, quiet things, the way Mom had seemed distracted in her final weeks, the way she sometimes looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name, something between guilt and reassurance. Why had she been so secretive near the end? What was she carrying that she hadn't yet put down? What they didn't know was that Mom had changed something. I remembered it clearly once I started letting myself think about it. There had been an afternoon, maybe 6 weeks before she passed, when Mom had insisted on going out alone. That was unusual. She was weak then, and I always went with her, but that day she was firm. "I have something to handle," she said, and her voice carried a finality that I hadn't questioned at the time. She came back quieter than she had left. That evening, she sat beside me on the couch and said something I had tucked away without fully understanding. "Not everything is what it seems, Claire." I had smiled and assumed she was tired or reflecting on life the way people do when they know they're running out of it. But then I remembered the envelope, sealed, thick, sitting in the drawer of her bedside table. I had seen it once and asked her about it. She had simply shaken her head. "Not yet," she said. "You'll know when." I had respected that. I had not pushed her. And then she was gone, and I had forgotten, buried under grief and funeral arrangements and the shock of Ethan's claim. Now I remembered. I didn't tell Ethan. I didn't tell the family. I kept the thought close and quiet, turning it over in my mind at night while the city hummed outside my window. I didn't have proof yet, but I had a feeling, a slow, certain feeling that my brother was walking into something he had absolutely no control over. The call from Mr. Harris came on a Thursday morning. He introduced himself as the lawyer who had handled Mom's legal affairs for over a decade. His voice was unhurried and precise, the voice of someone who measured every word before releasing it. He said he had seen the case details and wanted to speak with me privately. We met at a small office that smelled of old paper and wooden furniture polish, the kind of room that felt sealed off from the noise of everything happening outside it. "Your mother trusted you more than you think," he said, looking at me steadily across his desk. I felt something loosen in my chest, but also tighten. Hope and fear arriving at the same time, the way they do when something important is close, but not yet certain. I asked him what he meant. He simply told me to be patient and to let the process unfold. Meanwhile, Ethan had become untouchable in his own mind. He mocked me outside the courtroom one afternoon, loud enough for people nearby to hear. "You're dragging this out for nothing," he said. His lawyer nodded beside him like punctuation. But Mr. Harris had told me to stay calm, so I stayed calm. I breathed through the heat of it and said nothing. The final hearing date was set, and the days moved toward it with the slow inevitability of something that had already been decided somewhere none of us could see yet. Family members openly told each other that Claire was going to lose, that she should have settled when she had the chance. They sat in their certainty and waited, and I stood alone, uncertain of nothing. The courtroom felt different on the day of the final hearing, colder. The ceiling seemed higher. Every sound, the shuffle of papers, the murmur of voices, the sharp click of heels on the floor, carried more weight than it normally would. Ethan's lawyer went first. He was composed and thorough, building a careful argument for the full transfer of ownership to my brother. He cited Ethan's business background, his financial planning capabilities, his position as the natural heir of a property that required strong management. He made it sound logical, inevitable. The judge listened with an expression that revealed nothing. Then came the question that changed everything. "Is there any final documentation to be submitted?" the judge asked. Ethan's lawyer was already relaxing slightly, the posture of a man who believes the game is over. And then Mr. Harris stood up, slowly, without any hurry at all. "Yes, Your Honor, there is." He approached the bench and presented a sealed envelope. Inside it was an updated will, signed and witnessed in the final weeks of my mother's life. The room went very quiet. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the faint sound of the air conditioning above us, steady and indifferent, while the world inside that room shifted completely. The will was clear, unambiguous. The apartment belonged solely to Claire Dawson, and there was an additional clause, one that made the silence in the room feel even heavier. If the inheritance were contested unfairly or in bad faith, the contesting party would forfeit any remaining inheritance benefits entirely. Ethan's face did something I had never seen it do before. It fell. Not dramatically, not with tears. It simply collapsed inward, the confidence draining out like water through a crack. "This has to be fake," he said. His voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. Mr. Harris turned to look at him. "Your mother anticipated that reaction," he said simply. The judge examined the documentation. The signatures were verified. The witnesses were confirmed. The document was legally binding and fully authentic. My mother had not left things to chance. She knew what Ethan might do, and she had quietly, carefully made sure it wouldn't work. Ethan did not just lose the apartment. The additional clause meant he had damaged his own position further by pursuing the case in bad faith. He had walked into the courtroom certain of victory and walked out with less than he had when he arrived. The family members sitting in the rows behind us said nothing. The whispers were gone. There was only the sound of a room full of people absorbing something they had not expected to absorb. I sat still and breathed. I didn't cry, I didn't smile. I just let the truth settle around me like something that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to become visible. I walked out of that courtroom without looking back. Ethan stood near the door for a moment, and our eyes almost met, but he looked away first. His confidence was not just shaken, it was gone, completely and quietly gone. The family began adjusting their tone in the days that followed. A few calls, a few careful messages worded to sound like support. I heard them out politely, but I no longer needed their approval to feel steady. That need had dissolved somewhere between the sleepless nights in that hospital room and the moment the judge closed the file. I returned to the apartment on a Saturday afternoon. I stood in the doorway for a long moment before stepping inside. The light came through the curtains the same way it always had. The walls held the same quiet they had always held, but it felt different now. Not because anything had changed physically, but because I understood what it cost and what it meant. It was earned, it was protected, it was mine. I thought about Mom then, really thought about her. She had watched me for years. She had seen me choose her over and over without making it into a performance, without demanding recognition. And in her final weeks, in a lawyer's office I hadn't known she visited, she had made sure that her choice was as clear as mine had always been. I wasn't the one they believed in, but I was the one she trusted, and that, I realized, was the only thing that had actually ever mattered. I chose peace after that, not because I was weak, but because I was done carrying weight that wasn't mine. Reconciliation would require something real from the people who turned away, and that was their decision to make, not mine to chase. I had the apartment, and I had something harder to name, but more valuable. I knew who I was. I had always known. Now, everyone else did too. If your family ever tried to take something that was rightfully yours, you know how painful that is. It isn't just about the thing itself. It's about what it means that someone who shared your life could look you in the eye and decide you don't deserve it. Share your story in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear it. Subscribe if you believe standing your ground is always worth it, even when you're standing alone. Click hype to help this story reach the people who need to hear it most. Your story has power. If you felt something while listening to mine, please subscribe and share your journey in the comments below. Every hype you give this video helps someone else feel a little less alone in whatever they're carrying. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.